Before history was written in ink, it was carved into stone, etched into clay, and whispered through generations who feared forgetting. Across deserts, temples, and ruins buried beneath centuries, one pattern keeps reappearing. Not just gods, not just myths, but beings who came from above and left something behind. To understand this, we have to step into two worlds: the sacred writings of the Bible and the mysterious, often debated Book of Enoch. Two records, two perspectives, and one question. Did something happen in humanity's distant past that we've only partially remembered? Chapter 1. The Sons of God. In the book of Genesis, there's a passage so brief yet so unsettling that it has sparked debate for thousands of years. It reads, "The sons of God saw the daughters of men that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. Then, almost like a shadow passing across the page, there were giants in the earth in those days." That's it. No full explanation, no detailed account, just a glimpse of something unnatural. Who were the sons of God? Why did they come down? And what were these giants? To answer that, we turn to the text that dares to go further. Chapter 2. The book they left out. The Book of Enoch is not included in most modern Bibles, but it wasn't always ignored either. Fragments of it were found among the Dead Sea Scrolls. Early Jewish communities knew it. Even some early Christians referenced it. And in its pages, the vague becomes specific. The mystery becomes a story. According to Enoch, the sons of God were not human rulers or poetic metaphors. They were angels, watchers, assigned to observe humanity, but instead of watching, they chose to act. Chapter 3. The Descent of the Watchers. The Book of Enoch describes a moment that feels almost cinematic. 200 watchers descending from the heavens onto Mount Hermon, led by a figure named Semhaza. But this wasn't a peaceful arrival. It was a pact. They bound themselves together with an oath, knowing full well what they were about to do would break divine law. They chose desire over duty. They took human women as wives, and in doing so, crossed a boundary that was never meant to be crossed. This wasn't just rebellion. It was transformation, because what came next wasn't human. From these unions came the Nephilim. The word itself carries weight. Some translate it as fallen ones, others as those who cause others to fall. In the Bible, they are only mentioned briefly, but in Enoch, they are described in terrifying detail. Massive beings towering over humanity, consuming enormous amounts of food, and when the earth could no longer sustain them, they turned to violence. Cities fell, people suffered, and order collapsed. The Nephilim became more than giants. They became a symbol of chaos unleashed. But the Watchers didn't just create Nephilim. They gave humanity something else: knowledge, forbidden knowledge. One Watcher taught metallurgy, how to forge weapons of war. Another taught astrology, how to read the heavens. Others revealed secrets of enchantments, cosmetics, and hidden arts. To modern ears, this might sound like progress, but in Enoch, it is framed as corruption. Humanity advanced, but morally declined. Power increased, but wisdom did not, and the world began to spiral. Now step outside the biblical world and into ancient Mesopotamia. Thousands of years ago, the Sumerians wrote about beings called the Anunnaki. They were described as powerful entities connected to the sky, involved in shaping human civilization. They influenced kings, established order, and were often seen as intermediaries between the heaven and the earth. Some modern theories draw a connection between the Anunnaki and the Watchers. The similarities are hard to ignore. Sky beings, interaction with humans, transmission of knowledge, but there's a crucial difference. The Anunnaki belong to the mythological tradition. The Watchers are part of religious scripture tied to Israel and the early Jewish belief. Whether these stories describe the same phenomenon or completely separate traditions remains one of the most debated questions in ancient history. According to the Book of Enoch, the actions of the Watchers didn't just affect individuals, they corrupted the entire world. Violence spread, justice disappeared, humanity lost its balance, and the cries of the earth reached heaven. This is where the narrative shifts, because the story is no longer about rebellion, it becomes about judgment. The decision to reset. In both Enoch and the Bible, the same conclusion emerges. The world had become too corrupt to continue as it was. The Nephilim, the violence, the spreading chaos, all of it pointed toward a single outcome, the flood. Not just a natural disaster, but a reset, a line drawn between what was and what would come next. So what are we left with? Ancient texts describing beings from the heavens, giants who walked the earth, knowledge that accelerated humanity and nearly destroyed it? Are these literal events, symbolic warnings, or echoes of something real, filtered through the lens of ancient understanding? The truth may never be fully known, but the story doesn't end with the flood, because according to the text, something survived. And in part 2, we're going to follow what came after. Anunnaki, Nephilim, and the Watchers. Part 2, After the Flood, the Return of the Giants. The water recedes. The waters didn't just fall from the sky. They erased a world, cities gone, civilization silenced, the giants wiped from the earth, or so it seemed. When the floodwaters finally receded, the world was quiet again. Humanity began anew through one family, one line, one fragile restart. But ancient texts leave us with haunting suggestions. The story didn't end there. A clean slate or a crack in the foundation. According to the Bible, the flood was meant to cleanse the earth. Noah and his family survived, but everything else was gone. A reset. But resets are only perfect in theory, because the question lingers. If the Nephilim were destroyed, why do they appear again later in the scripture? Genesis itself quietly hints at it. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward. That final phrase, and also afterward, it echoes like a door left slightly open. Sons of Enoch. Generations after the flood, as humanity spread across the land, explorers from Israel returned with a report that shook their confidence. They had seen giants, not legends, not fossils, living beings. They called them the Sons of Enoch, the Anakim, and their description is unforgettable. We seemed like grasshoppers in our own eyes, and we looked the same to them. These weren't just tall warriors. They were overwhelming, intimidating enough to halt an entire nation's advance. Og, king of Bashan. One of the most striking figures appears later in the narrative, a king named Og, described as one of the last of the Rephaim, a group often associated with giants. His bed, according to the Bible, was over 13 feet long. Whether symbolic or literal, the message is clear. This was no ordinary man. Og ruled in Bashan, a region that became synonymous with these towering figures. and his existence raises a problem. If the flood erased the giants, then how did Og exist? There are several interpretations, each with its own implications. Some believe the Nephilim bloodline survived through Noah's family, possibly through one of the wives. Others suggest a second incursion, another descent of rebellious beings after the flood. And some see these accounts as exaggerated descriptions of powerful warrior tribes remembered as giants over time. The Book of Enoch leans toward a different angle. It describes the spirits of the Nephilim not disappearing, but remaining on earth, disembodied, restless, influencing humanity in unseen ways, a shift from physical giants to something more subtle. As the nation of Israel begins to establish itself, the encounters with these groups become more frequent. The Anakim, the Rephaim, and the Zamzumim, different names, similar descriptions. Powerful, feared, and often standing in direct opposition to Israel's expansion. These weren't just battles for the land. They were remembered as confrontations with something other, something ancient. Goliath, the symbol, returns. Perhaps the most famous of all is Goliath, a towering warrior from Goth, clad in bronze, armed with weapons that seemed oversized even for battle-hardened soldiers, and standing alone, he held an entire army at bay, until a shepherd stepped forward. The story of David and Goliath is often told as a lesson in courage, but beneath it is something else, another appearance of a giant, another echo of the past, and another reminder of whatever began before the flood still had traces in the world after. Memory or reality? So what are these accounts? Literal survivors of the ancient race? Symbolic representations of powerful enemies? Or cultural memories distorted through time? Mainstream scholarship leans towards symbolism and exaggeration. Ancient warfare often magnified enemies, turning strong warriors into giants in storytelling. But the consistency of the descriptions across different regions and time periods keeps the question alive. Why do so many cultures remember giants? The shift from physical to spiritual. The Book of Enoch offers a perspective that changes the tone entirely. It suggests that after their destruction, the Nephilim did not fully disappear. Their bodies were gone, but their spirits remained. These spirits, according to the text, became what we would later call unclean or wandering spirits, no longer towering over humanity, but influencing it from the shadows. If taken literally, this transforms the narrative. The giants didn't just vanish, they evolved into something unseen. The pattern continues. Across ancient texts, across cultures, a pattern emerges. Beings from above, interaction with humanity, corruption, judgment, survival. Whether in the form of giants or something less visible, the story doesn't fully close. It lingers, and each generation interprets it through its own lens. The flood was meant to end something, to reset the world, to draw a line between corruption and renewal. But if the giants returned, even in fragments, then the past was never fully buried. It followed humanity forward, through stories, through scripture, and through memory, and maybe through something more. Because in part 3, we step deeper into the role of Israel and the idea that these encounters were not just random, but part of a much larger design. Part 3, Israel, Bloodlines, and Biblical Warfare. A nation set apart. From the ashes of the flood, from scattered tribes and rising kingdoms, one nation began to take shape with a purpose unlike any other: Israel. not the largest, not the most powerful, but according to the Bible, chosen, and placed directly in the path of something ancient. The promise in the land. The story begins with a promise, a covenant made with Abraham, that his descendants would inherit a specific land. But this land was not empty. It was already inhabited by nations described as powerful, fortified, and in some cases, something more. Among them were groups tied to the same names we encountered before: the Anakim, the Rephaim, and the other tribes remembered for their unusual size and strength. This wasn't just migration, it was a confrontation. When Israel moved into these territories, the battles were recorded not just as political struggles, but as something deeper. Certain regions were singled out. Certain groups were described with heightened intensity, and certain victories were framed as necessary, not optional. To modern readers, this can be difficult to process. Why such urgency? Why such totality? One interpretation sees this as a standard ancient warfare. Another is a more controversial view, suggests something else, that these conflicts were not just about land, but about lineage, the idea of corrupted bloodlines. Within some interpretations of the Book of Enoch and later traditions, there's an idea that echoes beneath the surface, that the original corruption, the mixing between the Watchers and humanity, did not completely disappear, that traces of it remained, and that certain groups carried those traces forward. This idea has been expanded in modern times into what's often called bloodline theory. But it's important to draw a clear line. The biblical text itself does not present a detailed genetic framework. It presents narratives, descriptions, moments, and interpretation fills the rest. Sometimes humans need to think for themselves and not just always believe what they're told. When David faces Goliath, the moment is more than a battle. It's a statement. A shepherd, armed with nothing but a sling, stands against a towering warrior representing overwhelming force and wins. On one level, it's about faith. On another, it echoes something older, humanity confronting what once dominated it and overcoming it. Goliath isn't just an enemy soldier. He's part of a pattern, one that stretches back to the earliest stories of giants. Israel's role in the narrative. Throughout the text, Israel's journey is filled with conflict, but also preservation, survival through odds that seem impossible, victory in moments that defy expectation, and a repeated theme: protection of a line, a lineage. In traditional theology, this points towards a spiritual purpose leading towards future fulfillment. In alternative interpretations, it raises different questions. Was Israel positioned as a counterbalance to something that began long before? Again, the text doesn't state this outright, but the pattern invites speculation. This is where the line becomes critical. Ancient texts speak in layers: historical events, theological meaning, symbolic storytelling. Blending them without caution can lead to conclusions that go far beyond what the sources actually say. Mainstream scholarship views these accounts through historical and literary lenses. Ancient tribes, regional conflicts, cultural memory shaped into narrative. The language of giants becomes a way of expressing fear, power, and difference. But outside that framework, interpretations continue to evolve, especially in modern media. The danger of oversimplification. When discussing topics like bloodlines, influence, or control, it's easy to slip into the oversimplified narratives, reducing complex histories to single causes, or assigning intent where there is no evidence. The stories of the Nephilim, the Watchers, and ancient conflicts are often pulled into modern debates, but they belong to a different context, a different time, and a different way of understanding the world. Even with careful reading, questions remain. Why do these references appear at all? Why do similar themes show up across the cultures? And why do the idea of giants persist, even outside biblical tradition? There's no single answer, only possibilities. And each possibility depends on how you interpret the text: literal, symbolic, historical, or something in between. It's a story still unfolding. Israel's story continues far beyond these battles, but within this chapter, it intersects with something older, something that may have started before recorded history and left echoes that carried forward through giants, through conflict, and through narrative. Whether those echoes represent literal events or powerful storytelling, they've shaped how generations understand the past, and maybe how they see the present. Part 4. Hidden Knowledge and Modern Theories. The past never stays buried. Ancient stories have a strange habit. They don't disappear, they evolve. What once lived in clay tablets and sacred scrolls now pulses through documentaries, podcasts, late-night debates, and viral clips. The Watchers, the Nephilim, the Anunnaki. Old names wearing new clothes. But the question remains the same. Are these just stories we keep retelling, or fragments of something we're still trying to understand? The return of forbidden knowledge. In the Book of Enoch, the Watchers didn't just descend. They taught astronomy, weaponry, hidden arts, and much more. Knowledge that accelerated humanity, but at a cost. Fast forward to today, and some see a parallel. Moments in history where human advancement seems to leap forward. Industrial revolutions, technological explosions, and the digital age. Of course, mainstream history explains these through innovation, discovery, and progress. But alternative voices ask a different question. Why does knowledge sometimes appear in bursts? Is it coincidence or something else? The Anunnaki have taken on a second life in modern culture. Originally part of ancient Mesopotamian mythology, they are now often reimagined as advanced beings, sometimes even extraterrestrials. Popular theories suggest they engineered humanity, influenced early civilizations, and left behind knowledge encoded in ancient structures. These ideas are widely debated and heavily criticized by scholars, but their popularity reveals something important. People are searching for explanations that connect the ancient world with the modern one. So why aren't they? It's not just one tradition. Across the globe, different civilizations tell stories that feel familiar. Sky beings descending, gods interacting with humans, giants or powerful hybrid figures, a catastrophic reset like a flood. From Mesopotamia to Mesoamerica to parts of Asia, the themes echo. Mainstream anthropology explains this through shared human experience. Flood myths from real natural disasters, giants as symbolic exaggerations, sky beings as interpretations of the unknown, but others see a pattern that's too consistent to ignore. As these ancient ideas resurface, the role of Israel is often pulled into modern narratives, sometimes thoughtfully, sometimes recklessly. Ancient texts tied to Israel are studied, interpreted, and debated across the world. But problems arise when those interpretations are stretched into modern political claims without evidence. It's critical to separate ancient religious narratives from modern geopolitical realities. Blurring that line doesn't clarify history, it distorts it. The internet effect. In today's world, Information doesn't move slowly, it spreads instantly. A single idea can go from obscure to viral in hours. Theories about the Nephilim, the Anunnaki, hidden bloodlines, and secret knowledge, they thrive in this environment. Some are thoughtful explorations, others are speculation presented as certainty, and some drift into territory that oversimplifies complex issues. There's a reason these ideas don't fade. They tap into something deeper: curiosity about our origins, a sense that history might be incomplete, the possibility that humanity's story is bigger than we've ever been told. It's compelling, but compelling doesn't always mean correct. The challenge is holding both ideas at once, being open to the exploration while staying grounded in evidence. And that is the problem that people are having with politics in today's world. Let's be clear. The Bible and the Book of Enoch are ancient texts with historical and religious significance. The Anunnaki come from mythology, not verified history. Modern theories connecting all of these into a single narrative are interpretations, not established facts. That doesn't make them meaningless, but it does mean they should be approached carefully. Every generation reads ancient texts differently. What once symbolized spiritual truth might now be viewed through a technological lens. What was once myth might be reimagined as history, and what was once accepted might be questioned. This constant reinterpretation keeps these stories alive, but it also reshapes them, and sometimes beyond recognition. What is the edge of the known? We stand in a strange place, with more information than any generation before us, and more uncertainty than we'd like to admit. Ancient texts offer pieces of a puzzle. Modern theories try to connect them, but the full picture is still incomplete. Maybe these stories are echoes of real events. Maybe they're symbolic frameworks, or maybe they're a mix of both. But either way, they continue to pull us in, because the idea that something bigger shaped our past is hard to ignore. Part 5. The Final Interpretation. Threads in the Dark. By now, the threads are on the table. Ancient texts, mysterious beings, giants before and after the flood, a chosen nation crossing paths with something older than itself, and modern theories trying to stitch it all into one grand design. But threads alone don't make tapestry. To see the picture clearly, we have to take a step back. What the texts actually say. At the core of this story are two primary sources, the Bible and the Book of Enoch. From them, we can confidently identify a few key elements. There are references to beings called the sons of God. There are mentions of Nephilim. There are accounts of giants appearing in later periods, and there is a narrative of widespread corruption before the flood. These points are very real, documented and part of the text. But the texts also have limits. They don't explain everything. They don't provide modern definitions, and they don't connect themselves to external mythologies like the Anunnaki. That connection comes later. But at what point do we decide that something has confirmed when it's history compared to modern day news? Everything beyond those core elements is interpretation. The idea that the Watchers and the Anunnaki are the same beings, interpretation. The belief that Nephilim DNA continued through specific bloodlines, interpretation. The assumption that ancient conflicts were part of a hidden genetic war, interpretation. Some interpretations are thoughtful and grounded, and some can be very likely. Others stretch far beyond what the original text support. and that's where clarity matters. The role of Israel in these narratives is significant, but often misunderstood. In the Bible, Israel's story is theological. It's about covenant, identity, faith, and survival. While giants and powerful tribes appear in the narrative, the text does not frame Israel's mission as eliminating the supernatural bloodline. That idea comes from later interpretations, not the original message. Understanding the difference is critical. Why the Anunnaki theory persists? The Anunnaki theory survives for one simple reason. It offers an unified explanation. It connects ancient myths, technological advancement, and human origins into a single storyline. It's clean, it's dramatic, and it feels complete. But reality is rarely that simple. Ancient Mesopotamian texts describe the Anunnaki within their own culture and religious framework. There is no direct historical evidence linking them to the Watchers or to biblical events. The connection is imaginative, not proven. But isn't all history? Ancient people didn't write history the way we do today. They used imagery, symbolism, narrative. Giants could represent power. Chaos could be personified. Divine encounters could express spiritual truths. This doesn't mean the stories are false. It means they operate on multiple levels: literal, symbolic, and theological. Trying to force them into a single modern category often strips away their depth. What we can say with confidence. After everything we've explored, here's what we can say clearly. Ancient texts across different cultures contain overlapping themes. The Bible and the Book of Enoch include references to beings and events that are still debated today. And many modern theories combine elements from different traditions in the way original sources never did. That's the foundation. Everything else builds on top of it. So why do these stories still capture attention? Because they touch something fundamental. The desire to understand where we come from. The suspicion that history might be incomplete. The possibility that humanity's story is more complex than we realize. These questions aren't going away, and neither are the stories. The final perspective. In the end, there are three ways to view all of this. Literal, these events happened exactly as described. Symbolic, these are metaphorical stories expressing deeper truths. Hybrid, a mix of real events interpreted through ancient understanding. Each perspective leads to a different conclusion, and none of them can be proven without absolute certainty, just like most of the history that you've read. The final ending, the story you chose. The Watchers, the Nephilim, the Anunnaki, the rise of Israel. Separate stories or pieces of one larger narrative. That depends on how you read them. Ancient texts don't just tell us what happened. They invite us to interpret, to question, to explore, and to decide. And maybe that's the point. Because the most powerful part of this story isn't what's written on the page. It's what happens when you try to understand it. Thanks for watching.